Good
All right.
afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our webinar on redefining retirement. We are very happy to be back in our webinar series in 2021. Happy New Year to everyone. Looking forward to a great year, and we've got lots of good content to share with all of you folks in the upcoming months. And we're going to get it kicked off with one of our favorite topics, which is retirement. And so we've got a special guest that we're going to introduce here momentarily, who's going to present for us. But before that, we just want to, go through a few housekeeping items to get us going. For those of you that are new to our webinar platform, there is a chat function on the left-hand side of your screen, and we encourage you to utilize that in order to ask us questions along the way. We'll try to address the questions while we're going, and then if we miss them, we'll certainly address them at the end as long as time is permitting. But definitely ask us questions because everybody's on mute in order to avoid the background sounds. Also, just a couple things to take note of. We do have another webinar already scheduled for next month, which is a very important topic this time of year, which is taxes, income taxes. So make sure you save the date for February 25th, which will be our next webinar. And then Joe and I actually just recorded a summary of the main provisions of the new Coronavirus Stimulus Act, the Appropriations Act that was signed into law late last year. And so that email is going to probably go out tomorrow. So keep an eye on your inbox. There's some really good information there that summarizes some of those provisions. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and get started here in the presentation. And I want to first introduce my two partners, Joe LeBlanc and Ari Crandall. And my name's Josh Kanan, for anybody that does not know me. And so welcome, fellas.
Good morning. Great to be here, as always.
Yep. I'm excited for a new year, and we got a lot on tap this year, so it's good to get the first webinar underway.
Exactly.
Yeah, so as Josh mentioned, guys have any questions, please use the attendee chat function. I'm usually the one kind of keeping tabs on that. So if I'm not looking at the screen, it's because I'm doing that usually. So the quick overview of the agenda today. If you're tuned in to figure out how much money you need to have so you can have a certain amount of income over your lifetime, this is not the webinar for you. We're going to be talking about retirement, but we're going to be talking about the non-financial aspects of retirement. So we're going to be going over the three phases, some of the myths versus the realities, and what you need to plan for, and how to kind of take control of your retirement journey. And the person who's going to help us have that conversation is Heather Hooper. And hi, Heather. So Heather I've known Heather for a long time, so I'll give you the formal introduction and then the personal introduction. So Heather's the Chief Retirement Officer and Plan Advisor at Retirement Wellness Group. So she's basically spent her entire career focusing on, all sorts of facets around retirement, spent a lot of time in the employee benefits space. She's really passionate about, being a fiduciary, educating, and kind of bringing that education component back into the phases of transitioning, through life and through legacy. So she's on a member of various committees and advisory panels for TD Ameritrade and a few other organizations. And so, yeah, she's all in, so to speak, when it comes to her field. But one thing that's really cool about Heather, besides the fact that she's a really nice person, is that just Spartan races. And so I dug around online and found these pictures of her jumping over fire and climbing walls and so forth. So I kind of told her how to use these. So yeah, we're using them. So anyway,
very impressive.
Yeah, I thought it would be good to include these photos because, like I said, this isn't about, just the math and the numbers. It's about living your life, and Heather does a good job of that. So with that being said, I'll pass it on to Heather.
Thank you so much for the introduction. One quick note on the slide that just showed me hanging off of something called the Helix. You may have noticed that the name Karen was written on my arm. And that goes back to sort of the passion around planning and around making good decisions that we all need to really focus on. So Karen was a friend of mine that I lost a couple of years ago to cancer. And she did all the wrong things when it came to planning. regardless of any advice, she was not really focused on doing all the right things. So that was my way of honoring her, in addition to always trying to advise. But needless to say, I think that that's kind of worth pointing out, because a lot of what we're going to be talking about today is planning for retirement. So, like anything in life that is worth it, retirement is definitely not a point A to point B journey. There's going to be peaks, there's going to be valleys, there's going to be detours. If 2020 taught us anything at all, it's that we are going to get thrown curveballs. And that's just going to be one of those situations that we're going to have to learn to navigate through. So the good news is, on the next slide, you can see that there's these different elements of planning. And when we know that those elements are there, and we know that those elements are going to come up for us on a regular basis, so lifestyle, work, health, family, legacy, all of those planning aspects, and knowing that those are the things we really need to be focused on, it can really help create a sense of comfort as you start to look at all the different phases and ages and stages of life that we're going to be going through, that Ari had pointed out on the agenda. So we're going to move through now the three main phases of retirement, starting with the fact that for today's presentation, what we did is we added the year 60 as a start and 90 plus as the end. Early retirement is oftentimes characterized as an extension of your pre-retirement lifestyle. So, but maybe with a little bit of extra time for travel and extracurricular activities. Middle retirement is sometimes, hopefully not for everyone, but sometimes when health and energy begin to decline just a little bit. So some of those extracurricular activities may go by the wayside, and you may choose to spend more time with family and friends and doing the things that you love. And of course, making sure that your money is going to last. And then the late stage of retirement is really focused on kind of a wind down of that activity related spending and a shift over to free time and spending time with the people you love the most, doing the things that you love the most, really focusing on your health, your well-being, and quality of life, and hopefully finalizing your legacy, not starting your legacy. We're big fans of starting early rather than late, but a lot of people will start in this later stage, and it becomes a lot more difficult to plan. So also on the screen, you can see what's depicted is what we call the retirement spending smile. And really what it's meant to illustrate is that retirement tends to have a little bit of an uptick at the beginning of retirement when you're in that honeymoon phase and maybe traveling and crossing some items off your bucket list. There tends to be more of a dip in the middle as things settle into a bit more of a routine before that uptick at the end that does tend to relate right back to health.
And I'd say, Heather, this is something that we've had experience with, right? In terms of, all of our interactions with our clients over the years that we've been in this business working with clients. This is kind of how we've experienced it, with our clients, right after retirement, working on all those home projects that they wanted to get done, traveling, and a lot of spending up front. And then they settle in and they're like, okay, now I got to make sure this money's going to last. And then certainly as we get into the late stages, you come into some health challenges and other things which might spike some of that spending. So it has been in the real world when we're working with folks, kind of that experience.
Yeah, I've seen it pretty consistently across the board, and also have some folks that are not in the best of health at the moment. So we're starting to see some of those healthcare costs come and bite us a little bit. So now that we have some context behind how life may evolve as we change through these different phases of retirement, we're going to dig into some common themes and beliefs associated with retirement, and then what we believe is really the reality behind each one. So this number one is all I need is a dollar figure and a date. This is something that we have been taught since day one, and while it's certainly a concept that we've heard over and over and over again, a dollar figure and a date without a plan is just simply not enough to get you there. There are way too many other influencers that you really need to consider, such as lifestyle, health, what work may look like, where you're going to live, your family care, what you'd like to leave behind. There's a lot of statistics behind all of these numbers as well, including the fact that 71% of Americans aren't even saving enough. So when you look at all I need is a dollar figure and a date, that's wonderful. But if 71% of Americans aren't even saving enough, then those two figures really don't even matter. Next on the agenda is the 60% that have to retire sooner than planned. So sometimes this is because of a layoff, sometimes this is because of a healthcare challenge, sometimes this is because they have to care for someone who needs a little bit of extra help. But there's a big chunk of people who also end up in a situation where they have to retire sooner than they had expected, which will also limit that income. And then you have 52% who are at risk of a lower standard of living in retirement because they simply just didn't save enough. So, all I need is a dollar figure and a date. It's a wonderful concept, but without a little bit of planning, it's really, really hard to do.
And that second one, Heather, regarding the 60% have to retire sooner than planned. And we hear some folks that say, well, I'm just going to work forever. And I could probably say my dad's one of those people. And for those ones that aren't saving enough, that's their justification is, I'll just work forever. But to your point, you may not have that choice. And in that case, you're all of a sudden not able to generate an income for yourself, and you hadn't planned, and now you're really stuck. And so that one is one that concerns, I think, is a concern for us as advisors.
The retire sooner one also has really come to the forefront in light of, everything that happened last year. I know many of you know we have a large law enforcement contingency. A lot of those folks are retiring sooner because, things are changing in the workplace. COVID and the convenience of working has forced a lot of people to stop working altogether. They're like, you know what? It's just not even worth it anymore for me to go through the headache of trying to continue my career path. I was going to push, from 62 to 65, but I'm done. I'm out at 60, I'm out at 62 or whatever the age is. And then also, health things come up either with a spouse or the person themselves that might force them to make some tough decisions, which, ties a lot of these numbers together.
Yeah, and I back it up even to the 71% because of COVID, because a lot of people who were working all of a sudden didn't have access to a retirement plan.
Yep.
And that was their only avenue for saving. So moving on to myth number 2, retirement is the longest single phase of life. This one I love because a lot of people try to consider it as almost a vacation, a 30-year vacation where perhaps you're taking walks in the morning, you're drinking wine at night, maybe taking a nap in the afternoon, having a lovely dinner. Every day is kind of the same. It sounds really, really lovely when you consider it to be a long vacation, but we can't forget about these 3 main stages that we had talked about in the beginning: early, middle, and late. And then it would be silly to think that these early, middle, and late, whether they're 5 or 15 years, are going to remain completely static. So there's other elements, other phases, other planning things to think about, including fantasy as an example. A lot of people, as they're thinking about retirement, think, oh my gosh, as soon as I retire, I'm going to learn how to play guitar. I'm going to learn a foreign language. I'm going to travel. I'm going to buy a boat. I'm going to do all of these amazing things that I've wanted to do for a really, really long time. And it can be very difficult to wrap your head around the stress that can come right after you retire, and you realize that retirement doesn't feel the way that you thought it was going to. And this is super common, especially if you haven't done some planning. So all of a sudden you realize, like, I have these days to fill when I don't necessarily even know what day it is. And I don't really want to learn how to play guitar because maybe it was a little harder than I thought, and YouTube is harder than I thought it was going to be, or whatever it happens to be. But that stress is a really, really common piece that a lot of people find comes into play when it comes to retirement. Then there's the honeymoon phase. This is the phase that I think most people talk about when it comes to retirement. This is the spending, the travel, doing all the things that you wanted to do that you had thought you had wanted to do, where it seems like it's going to be fun and it's going to last forever. But as I think we all know, honeymoons don't last forever. I wish they did. It'd be lovely if they did, but they don't. So oftentimes you're going to fall right back into a routine. And what happens with a routine, whether we like it or not, it becomes boring. And if COVID, again, has taught us anything, routines, like I feel a little bit like I'm in Groundhog Day every single day. And this is very refreshing for me as a result. But that routine can really require a reorientation. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to change everything, but a lot of people get tired of that same routine over and over again. So they go through a reorientation phase before falling into contentment. The other thing that I'll point out with this slide that I think is really important is you're looking at early retirement, middle retirement, and late retirement. Don't think that the honeymoon phase or routine or contentment or reorientation is only going to happen once. Again, we're talking about a 30+ year journey. And it's really important for people to understand that this is sort of a repetitive nature. And I hope for everybody on this call that you have lots of contentment and honeymoon phases. But the truth of the matter is that life has its peaks and valleys, and it's going to have a lot of things it's going to throw at us. So I do like to point out that you can probably expect to see some of these things happen more than once.
The thing I think about, Heather, that I hear from a lot of clients, and I think, guys, you probably hear it as well, is that I'm busier in retirement than I ever was in my working years.
Yep.
For sure.
And you see that when you see the stress and the that part of it, that just comes to mind. That's a common phrase.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And that's such a good thing. Like that, it's a wonderful thing, especially if you're doing something that's fulfilling. I mean, that's the best place to be. So myth number 3 is all stop working. So if you actually look up retirement in the dictionary, which I'm enough of a dork that I did, it talks about stop working. That's what it means. You stop working, which is totally ridiculous because I don't think it has anything to do with that. There are a short list of people that are going to fall into this category, a very short list of people that will fall in for the duration of their retirement. But for most of us, work in some capacity is going to be part of our retirement journey. It just will be. 50% of current retirees work, have worked, or actually plan to work in retirement. I think that's a wonderful statistic. And then you've got the number of people over the age of 65 who have continued to work since the 70s. That number's tripled. I think that's amazing. I love walking into a workforce. I do a lot with employee benefit plans, and I love talking to all the variety of people that I get to talk to. And you'd be really surprised at how many people actually fall into that category. These are people that enjoy the work they do. They want to continue doing the work they do, so they've decided to stay. And they've also probably recognized that they need to, because sometimes we need a little bit of extra income. Then you've got 7. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, and you can't underestimate the importance of having a reason to get out of bed every morning.
Absolutely.
For a lot of people, they need that motivation of something to do to, keep on going and put one foot in front of the other.
Yeah, and Joe, it's a great point because most of the people who I talk to fall exactly into that category.
Yeah.
There's somebody in our industry named, I think, Mitch Anthony. He calls it the new retire mentality. I think that's a book that he wrote, which is just a new mentality around retirement, that it's not like the old definition of retirement like you're talking about in the dictionary. It's different now.
Yeah, it really is. If you look at, longevity, I think definitely plays a role in it. But if you look at how it's changed and the fact that people have kind of recognized that it's a lot more complex than it used to be, I think that's a big piece of it. And the last statistic here is that 7 in 10 pre-retirees say they actually want to work in retirement. So hopefully that's because they want to rather than the fact that they need to. But my husband and I joke all the time that I'll never stop working. Like I won't. I do not sit down well. Everybody on this call who I love with all of my heart knows me very, very well, and I do not sit down well. So I have a really hard time imagining that I won't work. It may not be doing the same thing I'm doing right now, but it's really, really unlikely that I'm going to sit on the couch and do nothing. That's probably never going to happen. I don't do it now, so why would I do it then?
Right.
I love it. Awesome. On to myth number 4, and I think this is a really big one, is I'll live in the same home throughout retirement. It's a really common belief that a lot of people think associates with them because they haven't thought through all of the different elements that actually influence where we live. lifestyle, home structure, size, proximity, location, family considerations, finances, health changes. They just really haven't figured out all of those moving pieces, and a lot of people don't consider it. When I moved into the house that I live in right now, one of the things I didn't even recognize is the fact that in order to get into my house, you have to walk up a set of stairs. We won't be able to live here forever. There's a very steep set of stairs we have to live. We have to walk. You can't get in the house without walking up them. So one of the things that I like to point out, and it's not meant to be scary in any way, shape, or form, is that the percentage of anyone reaching the age of 65 entering a retirement community is actually 40%. So Scott, my husband, and I joke all the time that as soon as we turn 55, we're moving to Rossmore. So it's right around the corner from us. It's beautiful. It's very well supported. They've got wonderful homes. They've got tons of stuff to do. It's a huge social element to it. They've got access and proximity to everything that you could possibly need. If you want to go to the grocery store, it's within walking distance. If you want to go on a hike, it's within walking distance. If you want to go to the swimming pool, it's within walking distance. So a retirement community is not necessarily meant to be a scary thing. But the other element, the other flip side to it is it also does allow for support as you need it. So as we get older, sometimes we need that extra support. So that 40% number, again, is not meant to be scary. And again, if I end up in Rossmore at 55, then I'll let you guys know. But I think that's another element to consider. And then the other one is that 3 out of 5 Americans actually want to spend their golden years in another city. And sometimes that's related to kids. I would go back to Ari's point about COVID earlier. I know more people this year who have moved out of state than ever before because they've recognized that they can work from anywhere and they can lower their cost of living, probably get paid close to the same, and live in a bigger house with more land in a spot that they really like. So 3 out of 5 people actually have the desire, whether it's grandkids or related to finances or something else, to live somewhere else. So I think that's also something really interesting.
And relating that to our clients, once again, guys, we have several clients that have done this. As soon as they've hit retirement, they've ultimately decided to move outside of California for maybe cost of living issues, closer to the grandparents or grandkids, whatever it happens to be. But we've got now clients all over the country, it seems, because of that very issue where they've reached retirement and they made that choice.
What's interesting is we've had a lot of clients that don't know each other move to a couple of like key geographical areas, so we've had some clients go to Nevada, and some clients go to Idaho and all these different states. And a lot of them don't know the other people that are there, but, we're seeing this consistent theme of people kind of saying, okay, let's take some money off the table, take some chips off the table, so to speak, in terms of our home and move. The other end of the conversation too with the moving is, people have kids, those kids go off to college, they meet people, they get married, they settle into other states, and they move so they can be closer to both of their children and grandchildren. So we have a client who moved from California to Indiana because it was central to 2 of his kids that lived, within an hour one way or the other of where they live. Indiana wasn't on the radar for them 5 years ago.
Absolutely. I think it's so important. And I also would add that the world is becoming more digital. So we're actually able, thanks to, platforms such as this, to interact with one another and still see each other and have a real conversation where you can see somebody. So I think that that's also another element. And let's not kid ourselves. California is really expensive.
Yes, it is.
All right. So Medicare will cover my healthcare expenses. This is myth number 5, and it's a big one. While many may not count on all of it being covered, 62% is actually the percentage that Medicare actually covers. And that number is a little bit shocking to a lot of people. And there's some of the things that I really like to point out from a planning perspective that the guys at Premier can help you with is really understanding and knowing what is and what is not covered. So there's a couple things that were a bit of a surprise to me, and I really know this mainly because of my mom, is dental is not covered at all. It's not under Medicare at all. And dental can be very, very expensive. And we've had quite a few interesting conversations with my dad, who is very cheap and was not very happy with the bill that he got. So I do like to point out that dental is one of the things to definitely plan for some out-of-pocket expenses on, because your mouth health is actually directly related to your heart health. And part of the reason I point that out is I learned that through my mom, who has a heart condition. So it's really important that you pay attention to those things. And the two things that I hear from older people is that they wish they took better care of their teeth and their feet. So I can't answer the why, but I'm probably going to fall into the same category. The second thing that's not covered that the gentleman at Premier can help with is long-term care. If you don't have long-term care, you may not be in a situation where you can secure it. Unfortunately, when I tried to tackle that for my parents, they just were not at a stage where it was going to work for them. It was going to be too expensive. But if you don't have long-term care, please, please, please talk to these guys about it. It is so incredibly important. It is going to protect you, especially when you look at the fact that we're living longer and longer, and there's diseases such as Alzheimer's and some things that can be incredibly expensive when it comes to the care that's really required. So long-term care insurance is not covered by Medicare, and it's definitely a conversation that you absolutely should be having. The last thing I'll say as far as Medicare is concerned, and many of you may already be aware of this, is there's something called the donut hole relative to Medicare. And what that donut hole is for a period of time during the year, your prescription costs are not covered by Medicare. And the only reason I know that is because I pick up the prescriptions for my folks, and I'm the one who's paying for them. They do pay me back, but needless to say, when I went in to pick up some medication for my mom, my jaw hit the ground when they told me what the cost was, because I'd paid for it before and it was never that much. So it's really important for you to know and understand, what is and what is not covered relative to that other 38%.
And Heather, you mentioned that dental, and I can't tell you how often that comes up in client meetings where all of a sudden they need to take a withdrawal from their portfolio because of an unexpected expense. And then when we start talking about it, it's all of a sudden well, yeah, this big dental bill for $7,000 that I didn't expect.
Yeah.
Dental expenses are a huge one.
It's crazy.
That's one of the big factors, just not only just in general, is a lot of times, there's this implication that retirement is this linear process, and you just plod along and there's a little inflation adjustment and you take out X amount per month and away you go. And it is a variation of unplanned expenses along with some consistent ones, right? I mean, hearing aids, right? I'm dealing with this with some family members. It's like, well, hey, we need $6,000 for hearing aids. It's like, I need $20,000 to get dental work done. These are big chunks that are unplanned, and those are things that we address in the retirement income and asset component of the planning, but also that it ties into this, and it's just important to be cognizant of both the financial and non-financial aspects.
Yeah, and I can also promise you, of all the advisors that I've worked with in my 20 years, these guys are the best.
Well, thank you.
So, and I say that with the utmost confidence, the best. They know everything. They do the planning from A to Z. They're going to ask the right questions, sometimes questions that maybe even be uncomfortable, but they're going to handle it. They're going to know exactly where you're at, and then they're going to adjust along the way. You have to remember that a plan isn't something that you stand by forever. A plan is a dynamic element. It's something that's going to change as you get older, as things change, as your lifestyle changes, as something changes with your spouse. All of those things you're going to have to navigate, and these guys do it. And they do it incredibly well, the best I've seen. So on to myth number 6, I'll retire at 65 and I'll live another 5 to 10 years. Here's the good news. This is no longer really the case, thanks to medical advances and the fact that we're eating healthier and we're paying a little bit more attention to the things that we probably need to from a health perspective. However, we oftentimes underestimate how long we're going to live. That's very, very, very common. And that's something that everyone needs to kind of consider when it comes to retirement, because a healthy 65-year-old man has a 41% chance of making it to the age of 85. That's a lot longer than the 5 to 10 years we used to bank on, and a 20% chance of making it to 90. A healthy 65-year-old woman has a 53% chance of making it to 85 and a 32% chance of making it to the age of 90. And then we have a couple who has a 72% chance of making it to the age of 85, a 45% chance of making it to the age of 90, and an 18% chance of making it to the age of 95. And this is all, of course, if they don't kill each other first. And the other thing that I will point out is over the last 6 years, upper middle class men have been increasing their longevity. So they're starting to catch up with women living longer. So it's very possible that we may be actually on par after a short period of time. So if you're looking at retiring at the age of 65, living another 5 to 10 years, that's really no longer on the plate. And the flip side of that is, in truth, some people won't have enough money if they have just the 10 years to make it any further than that.
The other thing too is there are some situations where we have, pensioner retirees, civil employees that actually spend more years in retirement than they did working, and that's a pretty significant, thing to think about just from a how do you occupy your time perspective, and it's like the first 2 years someone retires, it's, they're busy like fixing the house and painting the trim and getting the irrigation system set up and, spending all this money and vacationing and so forth. And like that retirement smile you talked about earlier, there's a lot of spending up front, a little decrease or more contentment style spending, and then a ramp up, at the end as health things come over. So
absolutely.
It's fascinating to watch the transition. I mean, we've all been doing this for 20 years, and what you learn in college, helps get your degree, and then what you learn in the field helps you understand how it really works. And having hundreds of people retire, we get a really good gauge of helping them understand what questions they need to ask us as retirees, and help them understand what lies ahead as they go down the path.
And what's interesting about these statistics, Heather, when you think about, 18% that one of them is going to live till age 95. And then when we go out and do our assumptions for their plans, for the client's plans, and we put in there that, we're assuming you're going to live to age 90 or 92. A lot of the times we'll get back, you got to lower that. We're not going to live that long. And, and this is where the data, and it's good to point out that, hey, this is where we're getting this information, because, there's ultimately two outcomes. They're either going to outlive the money, or the money's going to outlive you. And, I think you guys might remember we did this presentation years ago for a client event where we had the guy that interviewed all the centenarians that were over the age of 100. And basically, they told their stories about, their experiences, and they gave advice and tips for everybody that was the listener. And these people, 106, 104, 102, basically their number one piece of advice was, you better plan as if you're going to live to age 100. Because in their cases, they didn't. And then all of a sudden they get to, age 100 and they're dead broke because they didn't plan to live that long. So when we put in our assumptions that we're going to live that long, it's on purpose, because what if you do? And then all of a sudden, you didn't plan for it and you didn't have enough money.
Right.
It would be bad planning to plan for 10 years and actually live for, 20 or 25.
Right.
Yeah.
I would also add to that I think one of the number one things I hear from clients is that they don't want to be a burden to their family. And if you run out of money, guess what?
Yes.
Yep.
So moving on to myth number 7, and I think it's the last myth, but I think it's also the most important, because I believe that humans need other humans. Along with retirement comes a laundry list of challenges, opportunities, complexities, and sometimes they require assistance from other people. And whether that's going to be a family, a friend that you lean on, somebody with some sort of expertise, or a financial professional, 60% of working households currently use some type of financial professional to help them plan for retirement. It's complicated. And then that number actually increases once people go into retirement. It actually goes to 70%. And the reason is because people realize as you get older, life does not get easier. It actually gets more complicated. There's more moving pieces, there's more people, there's more planning, and there's a lot of different things that need to go through. So from here, what we're going to do, we're going to dive into each one of the different categories. I am going to try and go a little bit faster because I recognize that we want to make sure that we're not boring anybody as far as all of this stuff is concerned. So these are the areas that you really need to plan for and what we're going to be digging into. And if you move to the next slide, what we're going to start out with is lifestyle. So lifestyle is really about your aspirations, your interests, the things that give you a reason to circle dates on the calendar, your social life, your values. It's about finding fulfillment in the time that you spend and the money that you spend and making sure that everyone is really in alignment along the way and sort of accomplishing the things that they want to accomplish when it comes to retirement. Oftentimes there's different examples of planning that we can do. Somebody who wants to spend big and go out big out the gate, early retirement, they want to spend their money, they want to travel, they want to do all of these things, versus someone who wants to downsize to an RV and visit national parks and read a bunch of books that have just gathered dust over the years. Those two different scenarios are going to require very, very different planning and very, very different dollars associated with them. So it's important to really consider the different ages and stages as it comes to planning for retirement. And I would strongly encourage you to reach out to Joe and to Ari and to Josh as far as what your goals, where you live, and how you spend your time are concerned. From there, we'll go on to lifestyle. From lifestyle, we will talk a little bit about the things that you can control. So planning with the phases in mind. We talked about early, middle, and late retirement. I think that's really important. And all the little in-betweens, the fantasy, the stress, the honeymoon, the contentment, that also goes into consideration, as well as considering your living arrangements. We like this to be a proactive conversation rather than a reactive conversation. A lot of people have this conversation after something happens. Try not to be that person. Another thing that is on the list of something that you can control is spending plans. So if you have something on a bucket list that you're really interested in doing, then you know that you're going to be spending some money on it. It's almost the opposite of a budget. So you're trying to figure out exactly what that thing is going to cost, and the folks over at Premier help you do that. These are not meant to be long-term things. These are meant to be a year or two. But if there's something that you want to cross off the list that you've always wanted to do, work with them to really understand what that's going to cost and how that's going to impact your lifestyle going forward. And last but not least is aligning expectations. Aligning expectations is one of the things that I think we're probably the worst at. We have all these assumptions that we think we're going to accomplish, and we forget to have the right conversations with the right people. So when it comes to lifestyle and what your expectations are, we strongly encourage you to have as many conversations about that as possible. Brief story about actually my aunt and uncle. This is Jeff and Nancy. They live in Napa. I love them to pieces. Jeff was a career executive, so he spent probably 25, 30 years outside the office, earning as much money as humanly possible and accumulating. Nancy retired many, many years before him, and she volunteered for time in two facets. One was down at the local church, and the other was at an animal shelter. And on that faithful day when he decided to retire, he found that their expectations were absolutely not aligned. She wanted to spend time with the grandkids. She wanted to be close to her She wanted to be close to her kids. She wanted to make sure that they didn't spend all their money, so they had something to leave behind. She also was finding an amazing amount of fulfillment through volunteering her time, both at the church and at the animal shelter. So luckily, they were able to work with some fabulous advisors and find a happy medium. So moving on from there, what we have is work. And I would argue that work is one of the more complicated areas, as discussed before. The definition has changed over time. And initially, when we start working, when we're in our 20s, it starts out as being something that's a bit of a distraction. It's more about financial stability and maybe some independence than it is anything else. And from there, there's some other aspects that start to get tucked in, such as status, social aspects, structure, and purpose. And one of the things I find the most interesting about working with people in retirement is what happens is that list after financial stability is crossed off the list or largely crossed off the list, is the list actually flips. So you'll find that purpose is what ends up at the absolute top of the list because they realize that that's what drives them. That's the thing that really has them go to work on a regular basis and figure out, all the different moving pieces of the puzzle. For anyone who has not seen the movie The Intern with Robert De Niro, I think that also gives a really good example of how having a structure and a place to go and a purpose and a reason to get out of bed every morning. It's a really wonderful movie. It's very light and very funny. I would strongly suggest that anyone that's considering retirement or even in retirement watch that movie because I think it does a really good job of kind of showing how it's a little bit more complicated than we oftentimes give it credit for. With work, there's a lot of different things that you also are able to control. And, it starts out, of course, with, how much and how often and what type. For those who choose to retire, how often do you want to work? How many hours do you want that to look like? What type of work do you want to do? Do you want to volunteer? Do you want to be someone's mentor? Do you want to sit on a board? There's a lot of different things that you can choose to do. Beyond that, there's other things that you can also control, such as your filling the gap of what work provides. I think that's another element. So when we look at that list of structure and fulfillment and purpose and status and all of those elements, understanding what's the most important to you, I think is critical. For my dad, I know it was status. It was really hard for him when he retired to not say any longer that he was a business owner or that he was president of Rotary. That was a problem for him. And so he needed to fill that gap. Beyond that, there's other things that you can control, including making sure that your money is working for you. And I again point back to the very best advisors, managing your tax situation. Make sure that you're including them in these conversations because they know how to get creative, all within the realm of the law, but making sure that your tax situation is working for you. I think that's a really, really important aspect of it. And another element that comes into play is when to take Social Security. I would say this is probably the number one question that we end up getting from clients over time is, do I take it early? Do I take it late? What happens if I start working again after I start taking it? And what happens if I have a spouse die? So make sure that you're asking a lot of questions around Social Security. I think that's really important. Distribution of pension is another one. Not everyone is lucky enough to have a distribution of pension, but for those of you who do, it can be incredibly complex. Lots of different ways to take it, lots of different numbers that need to be crunched. So in addition to working with the company that had offered the pension, I would also strongly recommend that you involve your advisor in that question to figure out what's going to work the best for you.
Those four, sorry to interrupt you, Heather. Those 4 items are probably the 4 most common planning questions that we receive for folks that are transitioning into retirement. I want to take Social Security. I have a pension. When should I take it? What are my taxes going to look like when I retire? Right? I mean, these are big decisions that initially may seem really easy to make when you're just trying to backfill into an income goal. But over time, people don't always understand the scope of how important those decisions are and the impact they can have on overall cash flow, taxes, Medicare premiums, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that is really, those things are really, really important to dig into from a planning perspective because we see people make mistakes, irrevocable mistakes in those areas a lot. And had they have known or spent the time to do the legwork, they would have done it differently. I mean, once you flip on the pension switch, you can't flip it off.
Yep.
turn it off, I should say, not flip it off. You
Right.
can't turn it off, right? With pensions, there's, do I take 100% and my spouse gets 100%? Do my spouse get half and I get more? How does that impact things? Do I take Social Security at 70? What about my distributions from my IRAs at 72? I mean, these are all really, really important things that need to be dug into. So,
And
Yeah.
on top of that is this one here, which is need additional income. It's the timing of when you start taking monies out of your retirement plans too that becomes a big factor in making sure you're filling that gap of whatever additional income you need, but also not allowing it to build up so much that all of a sudden you now get to your RMD or right requirement or distribution age, and now you've got even bigger incomes that's causing more tax problems. And so trying to find that balance in terms of a distribution strategy once you've figured out Social Security and figured out pension. You're right, Ari. These are all factored in big decisions, and it's something that you kind of plan out throughout the timeline that you're trying to look at to make sure that it all works together in a cohesive plan.
Yep.
And you have to make sure to include the tax piece in that mental math, because a lot of times we have retirees that retire and just kind of forget about taxes, but taxes do come back and get you. And in fact, we're entering a phase where taxation in retirement may actually be higher than it was during working years.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. For sure. Great points. A very quick story about my father who did everything wrong and has no idea that he is in this presentation. But my dad was actually very lucky in that he hit financial stability at the ripe old age of 52. And he had two goals in retirement. One was to golf, and the other one was to not work. So needless to say, my dad did not have an advisor at the time to sort of help guide him along the way. And he pretty much found himself very bored because of the fact that he went down to the golf club and nobody else was there because everyone else was still working. In addition to that, it created enormous stress for family because he was driving my mom crazy. And my mom even came home from work one day and found that he had emptied out all of the contents of the kitchen cupboards onto the countertops with the expectation of redesigning how the kitchen looked, and then decided it was too much work to put it back and left it all behind for her. So needless to say, about 6 months later, after relying on friends, family, and an advisor, he ended up going back to work, but instead chose a field that he was very passionate about because he was able to cross financial stability off the list. And to this day, he's 79 years old. He's still running children learning centers on the West Coast. So moving on to our next section, which is health. And I would argue is probably one of the bigger ones because when health is good, life is good. However, this is the one area that has a tendency to be able to blow up all the other areas, whether it's lifestyle or work or family or legacy. It can do a lot of different damage. And there's a lot of good news around the fact that there's a lot of things you can control. You can see from the screen that based on Fidelity's latest study, the average cost of healthcare for a healthy 65-year-old couple is actually $295,000 with a 6% increase of cost every single year. So that's also absolutely something to plan for. This is no longer a static figure. Again, with health, there's a ton of things that we have a great ability to be able to control, such as healthy living, making sure that we're taking care of ourselves, making sure that we're going to doctor's appointments, making sure that we're not smoking, making sure that we're doing all the planning that we really need to be doing around taking good care of ourselves and making sure that, are you jumping out of planes or are you sitting on a couch? I think there's a lot of different things that you can plan for, including making sure that you understand Medicare and other benefits. There's a direct correlation associated with people who really understand their benefits and actually living longer. So I'd strongly suggest that you talk about those benefits, you read through them, you take advantage of the things that you do have available to you. Making sure that wills and trusts and all of those good things are up to date, and that you're working with the team over at Premier in order to make sure that everything is on track, and then tracking assets to the rising cost of healthcare. I think that's also incredibly important with that 6% figure. So health is probably the biggest disruptor of all of the different areas, and one of the things that I think that we have the most planning ability around, including things like term insurance and long-term care and a lot of other elements. So I would strongly suggest that you lean on the team over at Premier for that help. As far as I've got an emergency fund is another thing. Rather than taking distributions from a portfolio where you may be taxed, have a little bit of money set aside just in case. It used to be that we used to do that for car trouble when we were in college. It kind of changes a little bit as we get older, but having that emergency fund in place, I think, is also a really important aspect. And then considering what families should do in medical situations, making sure they're not in a situation where they have to make a call that they're not ready to make a call on because they haven't had those conversations, and documenting all of that so that you don't have any surprises in the future. And the last thing I would say is, spousal care, as well as making sure that you are on the same page. I'm going to skip over this story really quickly. It's mainly about someone who did really good planning and ended up in a better place as a result of considering healthcare costs when they weren't before. But the 3 root causes we find as far as family is concerned relative to retirement and happiness actually all stem back to what I believe is really communication. There's role ambivalence, poor communication, and of course, not setting proper expectations or having sort of vague assumptions around what's going to happen after somebody is home. I used to work with a retirement specialist who used to like to say that he married his wife for love, not for lunch. And I think that really does factor in, because I think roles do change as somebody comes home from the office and is all of a sudden sitting on the couch expecting the other spouse to do the same things that were going on before. So again, I think there's a lot of different things that you can control relative to family. And part of that is, having some harder conversations and making sure that everybody's on the same page. Organization and simplification, I really can't focus on enough. That's something that I think COVID has given a lot of people an opportunity to do. I know that my dad took control of his financial situation and made it a little bit easier if something does happen to them, that he can simply hand me a binder and some sort of digital vault where I understand what's going on in their current situation.
Let me point out real quick, Heather, real quick, I want to point out for some of our folks, Everplans is a tool that we've used in that area for organization and simplification that's been really, really strong. And so if you haven't heard of it, reach out to us. We do have the tool available for our advisory clients. And so let's reach out to us. We can give you some more information on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a huge one. And then also having open dialogue and planning for unexpected time and money spent on things like spousal care, something I like to call aging parents is another one. I'm sandwich generation. My mom has dementia as well as a heart condition. So I'm smack dab in the middle of that, between that and the 13-year-old. And many of us have found ourselves in the same situation. So definitely not a position I thought I would be in, but something I am in. Boomerang kids is another one of the kids that go off to college and come home, or decide to get married and come home, or find their dream job in New York and then they come home. So that can oftentimes be pretty disruptive to family as well as to planning for retirement. Spousal care, I think having some of those conversations, funding education, again, 529 plans is something that the folks at Premier Wealth can help you with, as far as, what is it going to look like as far as college is concerned. And I'm sure that's probably going to change in recent years. But I do think it's also very important to have those conversations proactively. Spousal care is another one where I think it's important to be on the same page with your spouse as far as how they want to be cared for as they age and retiring on your own, because not everyone is lucky enough that they are either married at the time or that they are going to live as long as their spouse. And that's going to change some of those family dynamics and make it a little bit tougher to have some of those conversations. One of the neat things about Premier is they actually do family planning meetings where they invite the older adult kids in to have conversations with parents so that they can get to know sort of that next generation, but also have time to get some of their questions answered, because you'd be surprised at some of the questions that are probably on their mind that a lot of people just don't really think are even present. So that's something to consider, and I would strongly advise anybody in the situation with kids that are, probably over the age of 40 to, consider having a family meeting with the folks at Premier. I think a lot of things get answered. People get on the same page. It really helps with organization and simplification, and can really help people feel very, very empowered. So moving on to our last.
Sorry, I know we're running short on time, but I want to make a quick comment on this Family Matters conversation that we can help facilitate for clients of ours. So we've had these, like I said, when the client comes in with their older adult children, and this isn't a here's how much money your parents have and they're going to be okay, and here's how much you stand to inherit. That is not the conversation we're having. What we're doing is we're educating the kids around the fact that your parents, have their beneficiaries set up a certain way. They're going to be okay. They've done the estate planning and so forth, and just educating them around high level or as deep in the weeds as the clients want us to get around that conversation. And also educating the children on things that they should be doing to help make sure that they are on the right path towards their future and so forth. So I just wanted to make sure that there was clarity around the fact that this isn't let's pull up your portfolio and show it to your kids. That's not the family meeting that we're talking about.
Yeah, and that's called our Family Matters program. And I would just reach out to us if it's something that you want to interested in potentially exploring more, and we can get some more information to you on that. Family Matters program.
Yeah. And the last planning area is legacy. And I think the next slide does a really good job of showing how choices now absolutely positively impact the future. So something to consider as you are looking at your spending needs in early, middle, and late retirement. Moving forward from there's a lot, again, that you can plan around as far as things you can control, like planning now. I'm a huge fan of this. I can't stress it enough. I live with, or I don't live with, but I spend a lot of time with my parents, and my dad didn't start planning until way too late. And he has found himself in some pretty interesting predicaments as a result. So when it comes to legacy planning, don't wait. There's no reason to. Work with the folks over at Premier and know that plan can change over time. That's not a problem. Make sure that it's not something that's static, that it can change. Run different scenarios, take a look at what retirement's going to look like from a number of different perspectives, with a lot of money, with leaving money behind, with not leaving money behind, with living longer, with living for a shorter period of time. Run those different scenarios. It will give you some power behind the conversation, which I think is also very important. Leveraging tax advantage gifts. I know that both Joe and Ari have helped clients in the past with things like stock and other situations such as donating real estate. So I think that that's also really important to take advantage of when you can. Not everyone's in that situation, but it's definitely worth the conversation. Making sure wills, beneficiaries, designations, and trusts up to date. I can't say how many horror stories I have around beneficiary designations given all of my years of experience, but we even have a handful of clients that made sure that their wills were up to date and then forgot to sign them. So please work with the team at Premier to make sure that everything is as it should be, especially in the times that we're living in right now. Life insurance is another one. If you're in a position where it makes sense for you to secure life insurance, I did that for my daughter. She's 13. I travel a lot. Makes sense to cover the house and cover college for her. So that's something that I took control of, that definitely the folks at Premier can also help with. And really quickly, I won't spend a lot of time on this slide, but we have 3 examples that I like to point out. Aretha Franklin, who with cancer actually died without a will. I can only imagine how long it's going to take for their family to figure out what exactly they need to do. Michael Jackson, who died over 10 years ago, had so many financial professionals involved in his estate that they're still to this day, 12 years later, fighting with the IRS. And then you have Robin Williams, probably one of the sadder ones of the group, who took his own life, but was smart enough to actually donate all of his intellectual property to a foundation so that none of the tax implications actually hit his family. And last but not least, and probably my favorite example of legacy, is the crocodile hunter, Steve Irwin. This picture always makes me smile. And part of the reason it makes me smile is not only because I used to watch his show all the time, but because of his passion and the fact that he folded his family into every single aspect of what was so important to him, which was conservatorship. Both Bindi, his daughter, his son Robert, have started a show on Animal Planet, and Robert actually helps Terry continue to run the zoo. So there is in no way, shape, or form any way that Steve Irwin will ever be forgotten. His legacy is going to live on forever as a result of what happened. It's unfortunate that he was in a position where he ended up dying early, but he actually set it up so that his legacy will live on forever through the family. And I think that that's a pretty neat and important aspect of this whole legacy conversation. So really quickly, we'll run through the rest of the slides, and I promise I'll let you go. And this is about how to take control of your retirement journey. So we're all going to have a totally different experience. Some of us in early retirement may decide to take that big vacation. Some of us in middle retirement may have a health issue. Some of us in late retirement may decide that it's time to sell the family business to our kids. Everybody's going to have a unique journey, which is part of the reason why it's so important to have an advisor. So when you're working with Premier, what they do to avoid all of the confusion and in order to set everybody up for success and take control of the future, and also to make sure that you're planning and getting clarity around the areas that make most sense, is they do what's something called a 360 life map, where they're taking a look at various areas associated with all of the different elements associated with retirement, whether it's your vision of the future, helping and protecting family, or building a legacy. There's a lot of different moving pieces associated with it, but they're factoring in your needs, your wants, and your wishes, and how those things may change over time. Again, this is not something that's meant to be static. This is something that they're going to pull up on a regular basis so that you know where you're at and what it is that you want to focus on.
Well, that was very, very good, Heather. And I think, the one thing and the theme that I get out of a lot of what was discussed is, there's things in retirement that you can control and things that you cannot control. And I think that what Heather's saying is that, really spend a lot of time working with your financial advisor, us, around the things that you can control, and not try to let the stresses and frustrations that can be dominated on things that you cannot control, like what's happening out there in the world with the virus, or what's happening with the stock market, or what's happening politically. A lot of that stuff is beyond control. But these things that we can control, that she's just run through over this last hour, are things that we can work on together to help you to have the type of retirement that you've envisioned. And so once again, Heather, really appreciate you coming on and spending some time with us to kind of talk through a lot of these issues. And I thought the material was phenomenal. So thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I will also do is I'm going to send everything out to the folks at Premier in a PDF format. So if anybody does decide that they want to dig into it a little bit further, that's always encouraged. The second opinion service, I can't stress enough. We actually have a retirement checklist that the folks at Premier are going to be sending out to the attendees, where we oftentimes will encourage the spouses to separately fill out this retirement checklist to start to really figure out what those gaps may be as far as retirement is concerned, and then meet with the folks over at Premier to talk about, what are the things we need to be planning about. We just listened to this hour-long presentation and a lot came to mind, and we really want to talk about it. So I would strongly encourage you to take advantage of the second opinion service. It's amazing, and I think it's going to be really eye-opening to those who don't already work with Josh, Ari, and Joe.
Yeah, so we'll be sending out a follow-up email with the copy of the presentation. Obviously, this was recorded as well, so in case you missed anything or want to review anything, you'll have access to it. You can forward it along to anybody that you think might find value in it. And once again, we'll attach that retirement checklist as well.
Yep. Sorry for yammering on and on. Hopefully I didn't put anybody to sleep.
It was awesome. And then just one final thing, a lot of folks are on our email list, and but also, we are on social media, which people are doing more and more. So please, whether it's our website, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, give us a follow. And on that note, I think we'll wrap it up.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone,
Thanks,
so
Heather.
much for your time.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Heather. Bye-bye now.
Take care.